Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started here in just a few minutes. So we're giving folks a little bit of time to get joined, and we'll get started here in just about a minute or so. All right. Well, there's still folks that are joining us, but we do want to get started on time. So according to the little numbers in the bottom of the screen, it is 7:30. So we will go ahead and get started with our program this evening. Good evening. My name is Philip Duggins. Then welcome to our fourth Mary Talk of the season. I'm here with the Alumni Relations Office at Mary Washington, and I'm excited to welcome you to our event tonight. We do have a sizable audience of just under 250 people registered from alumni, students, parents, and friends from all across the country and beyond. As with past lectures, there will be a time after the presentation for our guests to answer any questions you might have. Feel free to ask questions by clicking on the Q&A icon that's at the bottom of your screen and submitting there. Or if you see a question that really piques your interest, vote it up, and it will go towards the top of our list, and we'll make sure we get it asked. So that's how we'll go about answering and asking questions this evening. So at this time, I would like to introduce Mandy Bird. Mandy is a member of the class of 2022 and a current student here at Mary Washington, and she will introduce our speaker for this evening. Mandy, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me. Hello, tonight I will be introducing Dr. Majid to you all. Kashef Majid is an associate professor of marketing at the University of Mary Washington and has spent 10 years with the university. He is well known within the College of Business and has even branched off, attracting students from various majors to attend his marketing courses. Dr. Majid has also been known to develop deep connections with the surrounding Fredericksburg community, developing courses and immersive experiences that give students real experience outside the classroom. For instance, his course, Alleviating Food Waste Marketing, launched last semester and was featured in the Richmond Times-Dispatch and the Washington Post. He is no stranger to the Mary Talk series and has given a Mary Talk in the past titled Profits and Losses from the Sharing Economy. Dr. Majid continues to be a trusted advisor and inspiration for every student that arrives at his door. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Majid as he presents his Mary Talk, Stop Wasting Our Food, Food Waste in the World's Stupidest Problem. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mandy, and thank you, everybody. I greatly appreciate this. It's an honor to be able to present and talk to everybody, and it is an honor to be introduced by Mandy Bird, who I'm fairly certain every professor would say was their favorite student. We all wish we could have been Mandy Bird when we were in school, or the type of student that she is. I know I wasn't, but I certainly wish I was. So thank you, everybody, and Mark and Philip and the greater University of Mary Washington community for letting me talk to you guys a little bit about food waste and really one of the world's stupidest problems. So I'm going to share my screen up here. Here we go. And oops, here we are. Okay. And there we are. So tonight I've decided that I'm going to be breaking it down into different parts that talks about how food waste occurs, why it occurs, what's being done to prevent it, and even things that are simple that we can all do to kind of alleviate this problem. So a bit about me. One, I buy and I eat a lot of food. And I was joking with Mandy and Philip and Mark earlier in that the photo at the beginning was a pre-pandemic photo, because now there's a post-pandemic photo of me, which is maybe more accurate of who I am and represents my affinity towards food. But I also study the marketing side of it. This is my 10th year at the University of Mary Washington, And I've taught previously marketing research and digital marketing, but last year, as Mandy mentioned, I did start a new course called Alleviating Food Waste. So that's just a bit about me. Now, where I wish I was, as you can see, I'm currently at my home giving this presentation, and I've got Shrek, Shrek over my shoulder, and I'll explain why he's there in a few minutes. But there's a deliberate reason why he's there. But where I wish I was I wish I was at the Fredericksburg Food Co-op. And no, they're not paying me to say this. I'm not a spokesperson for them. But the Fredericksburg Food Co-op represented a unique partnership with us and the University, Mary Washington, where they really allowed us to gain insights into food waste from a retail perspective. We formed a partnership that's very unique, and we're very thankful that they were allowing us to do this. And so I thought, when I was asked to give this talk, I can present from the co-op. I can present from the Fredericksburg Food Co-op. And I spoke to a couple of people there. I spoke to their general manager and a member of the board of directors. And I said, that's a fantastic idea. Yes, absolutely. Go for it. So I wish I was there, and I wish this was my actual backdrop, but it isn't, because about half my household is currently experiencing COVID. And so I am also quarantining from my home. And so I was not able to showcase the co-op, because I think this is one of the great opportunities of these talks, is that you can do it from anywhere. And so I thought, why not bring the co-op to the Mary Washington community? I wish I could. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to. So what will you gain from this? What is there to gain from being here tonight? Do you buy a lot of groceries? Even if you don't. Do you ever wonder what happens to food waste that is past its best by date? Where does it go? What are the effects of it? What are the ramifications of throwing things away? Or do you ever feel guilty about food, about throwing food out? Well, you do realize that you could be watching such quality programming as Squid Games or The Avengers or Cobra Kai. And I'm glad you've chosen to be here for a few minutes, because I think there's information I'm going to provide to you which will help you save some money, and which will maybe perhaps alleviate the problem of food waste, which is great for the environment. And that's not something you would get from Cobra Kai. If anything, Cobra Kai would probably look down on you and tell you that that mercy on the environment is for the weak. So I'm glad you're here, and hopefully I can provide you with something that you will gain from this. So how big is this problem of food waste? How big is this? Approximately a third of all food created in the United States is wasted. It's never consumed. It was made for consumption, but it is actually never consumed. So that's pretty large. We're talking about hundreds of tons, millions of tons of food that just goes to waste. How is it wasted? Households, people, consumers, we're the biggest culprits of it. And then what can we do? How do we stop this? This is one of those things where we can, if we make enough of a difference in each of us, in each of our behaviors, we can have a phenomenal impact on this problem. This isn't a problem for a few. This is a problem that a lot of us can solve. So how is food being wasted? When I was younger, I used to think that food was being wasted because we didn't eat it properly. Like we didn't actually consume what was put in front of us. I think of Cookie Monster and how he would eat cookies. And I would think that's how food is being wasted. We're just not eating it properly. We're just throwing out our leftovers. We're not being efficient with our meals. And that's a reason. That's a small reason, but there's a lot bigger reasons. There's a lot more that we're doing that is leading to food waste. So a few things. I'm sorry, some of my images are not appearing. That's okay. That's all right. I do have some photos that I've taken throughout the last 6 months that I hopefully will appear in the presentation I'll be able to show you. So consumers are the big culprit. We're wasting food because we think it's bad when it actually isn't. It's perfectly fine if we're throwing things away. And when we're talking about best by dates, best buy dates are a gimmick. Best buy dates are encouraging us to buy more, waste more, and buy more. They were a boon from marketers. And I know I shouldn't be saying that, but that's really what their purpose was. There's very little that is actually backed by pure science that says you should be throwing this bag of chips out after it reaches a certain date. There's very little that is supported by that. But people believe that best buy dates are expiration dates. A lot of times food is discarded by growers. It doesn't look good. I was at the grocery store the other day, and I went to the produce aisle, and I saw carrots. And I said it was one particular carrot that it looked like it was growing a second head. And so my wife said, "Oh, that's no good. It's no good." Why is it no good? What is wrong with it? Aside from it doesn't look right. We're going to be cutting it up and we're going to be eating it. It's perfectly fine. Yet if we have this belief that if it doesn't look right, it's not right. And that's incorrect. And that's leading to a lot of waste. So farmers will not pick certain food. They'll just leave it lying on the ground because doesn't look appropriate. And then abundance. We produce more than we need, so we end up wasting a lot. These are some of the major factors that have led to food waste. Now, here we are. Over 5 pounds per household per week is wasted. 108 billion pounds of food per year is wasted now this is around the world. This is globally. I'm going to be talking about what this means domestically and how this can tie into food insecurity and how we can really make a big impact on alleviating food insecurity by fixing this problem. So I don't know whether anyone came here tonight and thought, Wednesday night is a good night to do some math. Maybe if you were an accountant, maybe that appeals to you. So I'll try to make it a little easier and make it a little lighter so that you're able to, so it's easily absorbable. Because I don't know whether that's anybody's favorite activity on a Wednesday night. I know it's not mine. So let's talk about what food insecurity means. Let's talk about what the consequences are on the environment and what this means economically. Now, in terms of food insecurity, we're throwing away food that could be used to alleviate hunger throughout the country. And we've seen rising amounts of hunger, rising amounts of food insecurity at levels that we haven't seen in decades. And yet we're throwing food out. This could fix that problem. Another problem is that food in landfills traps methane gas. There's a belief that I'll throw it out. It'll decompose. I was walking with my kids the other day and they're finishing and one's eating an apple and he throws it on the ground. And he says, my teacher said that it'll decompose and it'll be good for the ground. When it's that small, maybe it will help. But when it's by the ton, it doesn't help. If anything, it traps methane gas, which is more potent than carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So this is having a really large impact on global warming. And if we're throwing food away, if retailers are throwing food away, we're throwing food away, that means that we're going to have to pay more for food. If a retailer buys $1,000 worth of groceries and isn't able to sell them because they don't look good or because they're going to a best buy date and people don't want to buy past the best buy date, they have to throw it out, they take a loss, and they have to then increase our prices to compensate for the loss they just took. So overall, this is an economic problem, it's an environmental problem, this is a social justice problem. This is a problem on a number of different fronts. And one of the reasons why I actually really got interested in this is that there was a lot of discussion about different problems in society and the environment, and there's usually two sides. There's usually some who are more alarmed than others. There's usually debates. With this, I couldn't find any debate. I couldn't find anybody who was saying food waste, it's a good thing. There was no argument for it. Whether it was an economic argument, people were saying it's wasteful. Environmental, it's wasteful. From a social standpoint, this is a problem. This is a big problem. There was no perspective that people had that thought this was a good thing. And I thought, well, why aren't we looking at this? If we can bring all these people together, and there's very few things that do that these days, why can't this bring people together? Because everyone seems to be in agreement that this is a problem for whatever reason it is. So let's get into this. Okay, all right. Now, can we alleviate food insecurity? Now, again, I know that maybe doing math on a Wednesday evening wasn't on anybody's top 10 list, but I'll try to make this enjoyable and easy to understand. The average person eats 2 tons of food per year. Of course, some eat more than others, as I'm sure if I was in person, you would be able to understand, because then you'd be able to attest to, I'd be able to attest to that. But the average person eats 2 tons of food a year. So the US population is approximately 330 million people. And if 30% of all food is wasted, how much of that could be diverted to people who are food insecure? So the total amount of food consumed, 1 ton per person, times 330 million people. 330 million tons of food consumed. All right, that should say consumed. Now, if 30% is wasted, that means we produced more. That means that we produced 1.3 times 330 tons. So 429 million tons of food produced in the United States for consumption. So almost 430 million. Now, if we take the difference between what is produced and what is consumed, we have about 100 million tons of food that we are wasting a year. 100 million tons. I know those are just numbers. Let me put it in a comparison. A Boeing 757, like the one on the screen, is 100 tons. 1 million of those planes is what we are wasting. 1 million of these planes a year is what we are wasting in food. That's incredible. And that's creating methane gas, that's raising costs, that's leading to food insecurity. We're wasting 100 million tons a year. So 1 million of these planes every year is being wasted. What does that mean for food insecurity? 12% of the US population is food insecure. Now, that's a conservative estimate. It could be as high as 20%. So if 12% is food insecure, that means approximately 40 million people are food insecure in the United States. Approximately 40 million. 40 million people are food insecure, and we're wasting 100 million tons, which means that 2.5 tons of food per individual who's food insecure is being thrown out. 2.5 tons. And the average person only eats 1. So if we even reduced food insecurity by 40%, if we even reduce food waste by 40%, we would not have food insecurity. We don't even have to reduce food waste by half, just by 40. We can still waste 6. I'm not saying we should, but even if we reduce it by less than half, we are taking major steps to reducing food insecurity. That's why I titled this the world's stupidest problem, because it's solvable. It's absolutely solvable. It's happening, and we could fix it. It's not like we don't have the capability to solve this problem. The problem is that we waste so much, we don't get it to the people that need it. And so that's why this problem exists. So let's talk about what is causing this problem. Now, Mandy, who introduced at the beginning, was in this class that I had briefly mentioned called Alleviating Food Insecurity. Alleviating Food Waste. And what we did this semester, or this past semester in the fall, was that we studied it from a whole number of different angles. The economic side, the social side, the political side, marketing, business side. We studied it from all different angles. But what the students did was they would go to the co-op every week. They spend an hour at the co-op and they just document Okay, how long something has been on the shelf. How close is it to the best buy date? And if it's at the best, close to the best buy date, what's the likelihood that someone will buy it? What's being thrown out? What's not selling? All these things that they would document. What about the fruits and vegetables? What's being thrown out? Why is it being thrown out? And they would catalog all this, and they created a large database that we would then use to study the different aspects of food waste. But one of the unique aspects of this course was that they would then be able to take whatever the co-op was throwing out. So whatever it wasn't able to sell, that would have gone to waste. The students were able to take that. And what they did was they took it and they made things out of it. They upcycled it. So I don't know whether the image is visible, but you can see here, I think we have some lasagna, we have some muffins, we had rice balls. Mandy, who presented, she used to make the most elaborate desserts every week. And unfortunately, I don't have a picture of some of those things. But the students would take food that was past its best by date, use it as an ingredient in something else, and then we would share that during our class. We'd share that once a week on Mondays during our class. And you can see here, I don't know whether some of you have been on campus recently or in the last few years, but this is Woodard Hall, and Woodard Hall has been redesigned. It's now the College of Business, and the Eagle's Nest is on the first level, and outside there's a nice patio area. So we go to the patio area, and then we have our spread, and students would take samples of different things that we all made. And no one got sick. Everyone was fine. The food was fantastic. In fact, in one instance, a student made sliders using cheese that had a best by date of July, and we were having them in November. It was no problems. We were perfectly fine. Everybody was fine. And we were using this to demonstrate how silly these best by dates are, how invalid they are, that you're fully capable of still consuming food, using it as ingredients without having to throw it out. It's perfectly fine. We're throwing away good things when we don't need to. So these are the students here. These are some of them in the class. So that was a big problem, these best by dates. Now, I don't know whether it's well known, but I mean, it's well known now that they're associated with expiration dates, but they're not. Best by dates were created as a marketing tool in the 1960s by Marks and Spencer. They were put on their biscuits and their cookies to display freshness. And they caught on in the United States, but it wasn't to display freshness. Instead, it was to display, when the retailer should move the packaging, move the items around on the shelf. Because sometimes they would be seasonal, sometimes an item would have a new design, and so you'd want to get rid of the old design first. So it was a symbol for the manufacturer. It had nothing to do whether the food should actually get thrown out or not. But what caught on was that people thought it was associated with the quality and associated with the efficacy of the food. And so people would start looking at them and saying, oh, May 14th. I can't eat this past May 14th. And that became the trend over time. And more manufacturers started putting these dates on their foods, and it became associated with an expiration. In reality, there's only 2 items in the US that actually have a federally mandated expiration date. One is baby food, the other is baby formula. That's it. The other expiration dates are estimates, they're guesses, and in a lot of cases, they're put on out of convention, because if people think that the food is past its best by date, they'll throw it out, go to the store and buy new stuff. They'll just replenish the stock. In the store, instead of selling one bag of cookies or perhaps some cake mix, they'll sell 2 boxes of cake mix because the person had thrown out the other one that was past its best by date. So that's a big problem. A lot of these best by dates really have no validity. They were a marketing tool to get people to associate them with freshness, and they've since evolved into an expiration that people apparently follow religiously, and it's unfortunate. A lot of food is getting wasted that way. Belief that I don't want to be sued. The students called around and met with different sellers, different retailers, different restaurants, caterers in the area, in Virginia, and they asked them, what do you do with food that you can't sell? What do you do with food that's not consumed? what happens? And one of the answers we kept getting back was we throw it out. And the students would ask, why don't you donate it? There are food banks, there are charities. They would happily take this. Why don't you donate it? And the response they'd often get was, we don't want to be liable. If someone eats a bad tomato, someone eats bread that makes them sick, we'll end up getting sued. That's a myth. That is also a myth, along with the best by date. There, in my experience and based on my research and my reading and my discussion with people who do a lot more work in this area, the food insecure and the hungry don't really walk around with high-powered attorneys looking to sue. Instead, it's a misguided belief. If the retailer or if the person who donates gives food and something does happen, they are covered under a law that is referred to as the Emerson Act. The Emerson Act in 2018 prevents lawsuits. It's also known as the Good Samaritan Bill. If you perform this function as a Good Samaritan in good faith, you are absolved from liability. Yet people do have this misguided belief that they are going to be sued if they donate food and someone gets sick. We don't know the validity. We don't know whether the Emerson Act works or not. It exists. We don't know whether it works because it's never been tested. No one has ever actually brought this to a court. So it's there to prevent them, but yet it's never actually happened. And then marketers are to blame. Now I could lose my AMA membership for this, and this is probably not going to go over too well. But when you go to the grocery store and you see limit of 5 or 3 for the price of 2, or it was $9.99, but now it's $4.99, that may get you to buy more than you need. A lot of marketing goes into retailing to get us to buy more than we need. Retailers are very deliberate about everything from layout. There's a reason why when you walk in, there's a lot of prepared food, so those smells make you hungry. There's a reason why milk is usually at the back of the store. There's a reason why when I take my son to the store and he looks for cereal, the cereal is eye level for him, whereas for me, I have to lean down. Those are all deliberate reasons to get us to buy more than we actually need. So all these things function to create more food waste, more than we should actually be throwing out. Now, someone asked me, I got given a talk, I believe about a month ago, and so a lot of the questions came around expiration dates. And so I thought I'd spend a little bit of time talking about that. After that talk, there was a discussion with one of our biology professors, Professor Dolby. For those of you that are Mary Washington alumni, perhaps you've had Professor Dolby, is a fantastic professor. And so there was some talk about what's the science behind this, and we were kind of joking that there isn't a lot of science behind this. They were not meant to cue customers as to when they should throw out food. They were meant for grocery stores or retailers to know when to rotate items that had changed packaging, items that were seasonal. Consumers started to believe they were a sign of freshness. They thought they could decode them. They thought this was a code for retailers, but they were decoding them now. And eventually it took off and became known as an expiration date, when in fact, as you can see from the picture, best before has very little meaning. Very little. It's fine. The food is perfectly fine after this date. If you consumed it on the 14th of September, I'm fairly certain you would be fine, as would we all. Okay, so what is causing this problem? The cost of alleviating food waste is very high. People would say it's cheaper to throw things out than to actually donate it. And that's sad, but it is true. When our discussion with retailers is that, hey, we have a dumpster in the back and it's easy to throw it out. If we have to store food and then transport it to food banks, or churches, or charities, it's going to end up costing us. That's not profitable for us. Let's just throw it out. I mean, we're going to take up space in our our refrigerators by storing it. We really don't know how much is wasted. One of the things that occurred to us as we were working at the co-op, and then we looked into further, was nobody knows what's on the shelf in terms of this best by date. A lot of us believe that this is an expiration date, but the retailer doesn't know. They don't know that, hey, what's on the shelf is the best by date's in 2 days. We don't know. There's no way to know this. It's not coded anywhere. There's no technology that allows them to track what's on the shelf. They don't know if what's on the shelf is about to have a best by date in 2 days or in 20 days. It's all by hand. So a lot of retailers don't know. And so stuff stays on the shelf, and then people mistakenly believe that's an expiration date and they don't buy it. The retailer throws it out. You know, maybe if they had rotated the item, put it first, or held off on the new stock until the items that had a close to best by date were sold, that would help. That would help to alleviate this problem, but there's no way of tracking. Retailers are great at knowing what's been sold, when it was sold, the quantity was sold, the price it was sold, who bought it. They're very good at that stuff, very good at that information. They're not very good at tracking these dates that consumers apparently were very much addicted to and abide by almost religiously. And then we don't see how big this problem is. A lot of people believe that it decomposes, so it's fine. And if you compost it, absolutely, it is fine. That's great. A lot of us don't. A lot of us think that it'll go in the earth, it'll go in the ground, but at the levels that we throw out, it does not get absorbed into the ground. It gets absorbed in the atmosphere. And that is a significant problem. So what is being done to address this problem? Okay, what is being done? How are we fixing this problem? I'm sorry, I'm gonna just push this around here. So we're diverting food from landfills, both through donations and apps. And I gave an example of Too Good To Go. There are apps and there's technology out there that tries to connect those who are going to get rid of food or need to get rid of food with those who are willing to take it. And I'll use the example of Too Good To Go. This is a picture I took. I don't know whether any people here are familiar with Pete's Coffee. Pete's Coffee is a great coffee shop. It's a chain around where I live. And they sell, great coffee and pastries and some other items that you associate with a coffee shop. But what they'll do is that they'll have to replenish their stock every few hours. So any cookies, any pastries, any cakes that they had made, there's new stuff coming in. So they'll have to get rid of the old stuff. And traditionally, what would happen is they throw it out. But now what they do is they partnered with this app called Too Good To Go. And they'll post on the app that we have some food that that we need to replace. And so if I'm on the app, if I'm scrolling down the app and I see that, okay, at 4 p.m., Pete's Coffee is going to replenish their stock. So at that point, Pete's Coffee will sell me what they're about to turn over for a heavy discount. This food here, this is a large cookie. It's hard to really see the scale of it, but it's probably about the size of a normal hand. I got a brownie. I like to think that this is carrot cake. And then this was a pastry that had apple. I think it was an apple tart. If I had bought these retail, each one was about $5, about $20 worth of stuff. And I got it from Too Good To Go for about $4. I looked at the app and I said, okay, they're about to turn it over, $4. That's great. And I show up there between the hours of 4 and 5, and they have it in a bag for me. And I grab it, and I'm good, and I'm ready to walk out the door. And then we get this awesome stuff, which is perfectly fine. It's great at a heavy discount. They don't have to throw it out. Win-win. So there is technology out there that's trying to solve this problem by connecting those who will take the food with those who are willing to get rid of it. And that's one example of it. Gleaning. Gleaning's a classic example. Gleaning's the idea of taking volunteers to a farm who would then harvest the food that has been left on the ground because it couldn't be sold in the marketplace, and then providing that to charities and food banks. So a lot of food is left on the ground because it doesn't look good, because it doesn't fit a certain appearance. And so what volunteers will do is they'll harvest that, they'll collect it themselves. So it stops it from being wasted, it stops it from being discarded on the ground. And then there's an emerging business model of imperfect foods or upcycling, where you can pay for food that's perfectly edible but doesn't look good. So now you're willing to take that food, which would otherwise be discarded, and then buy it, which again is perfectly fine because it's now at that discount. It's now at that discounted price. So imperfect foods is just one model of that. It's the idea of a carrot has two heads. Still a carrot, still fine, still perfectly edible, just doesn't look like what a carrot should look like. I'll pay for that. And then I have some groceries. I probably paid a little bit less and I saved it from going to a landfill. So these are just some examples of what's being done to address this problem of food waste. Now, I did say, what can you do? What you can do every day to solve this problem? What can we do? I mean, what's the impact that we could have as individuals? So a few things to keep in mind. One, buy only what you need. Marketers are great at getting us to buy things we don't need. Marketers are fantastic at trying to get us to overconsume. And I say this having worked and studied marketing for probably most of my adult life now. And a lot of this stuff works, otherwise we wouldn't do it. Like limit of 5 makes me think that there's a problem with scarcity and I should buy 5 because they're limiting me to 5, even though I don't need to. Or buying in bulk, thinking that, sure, I will absolutely eat those 50 cans of Chef Boyardee. Who are we kidding? Not even I would do that. So buy only what you need. Studies in Europe have shown that there's considerably less food wasted because what's happening is that people are buying food on a daily or every other day. Instead of going to the grocery store once a week and loading up and then storing it, what they're doing is they'll buy what they need for tonight's meal or the next day's meal, and then they'll go back to the store. So they don't buy the excess, which ends up being wasted. Fruits and vegetables can be refrigerated and frozen. They can absolutely do that. That can prolong their life. Just a tip though, this is Professor Dolby mentioned this, and so I thought I'd also share this word of wisdom from a biology standpoint. Don't store apples, bananas, and tomatoes together because apparently they release a gas which causes all of them to decay. So separate them. That fruit basket, if you've got apples and bananas together, you may want to separate them because it'll cause them to go bad prematurely. And then best by dates, please do not hold them to a religious-like standard and confuse them with expiration dates. They are not expiration dates. Best by dates, especially for packaged food, is simply a tool to try to get you to buy more stuff. If your yogurt says it is best by February the 3rd and you're eating it 2 weeks later, you're fine. You're fine. It's not a hard and fast food. There's so much that goes into whether food actually turns in terms of bad, how you refrigerate it, how you store it, how it was transported, where it was transported from. All of this goes into these dates, which are not taken into consideration when those dates are stamped on the product. So let's ease up on the best by dates and stop holding them to a religious standard because it's causing a lot of problems. Okay, all right. So that's all. That's all I had. Hopefully, I provided you with something useful. Like I told you at the beginning that there's a reason why Shrek is looking over my shoulder, and the reason I have Shrek there is because, like Shrek, a lot of foods may not look good, but actually are quite good and similar to Shrek. So even if it doesn't look perfect, don't discard it. It's perfectly fine. So if you are interested in this problem, if you are thinking that this is something that you could employ or want to know more about, I did recommend a couple of resources for you. This website from the EPA provides some good tips on how we can all reduce household waste, but also there's a documentary on YouTube called Just Eat It, and it is by these two filmmakers in Vancouver. And what they did was for 3 months, they ate only what was about to be thrown away. They would dumpster dive. They would dumpster dive, initially thinking they're going to starve, but they actually put on weight and they document their story, and it's very entertaining. It's very enlightening. I showed it to my students and they really got a lot out of it. And we were even fortunate that one of the stars of the documentary, one of the producers, made a guest appearance by a Zoom talk in our class. And she talked about what she didn't know beforehand, all the preconceived notions like, I can't eat this. This is past the best by date. It was all thrown out the window. I'm sorry for the pun. I'm sorry. It was all thrown out though. But they were finding so much food, so much perfectly edible things. And if anything, they had to give it away because they couldn't store all the food that was being wasted. They ended up saving thousands of dollars, eating very well, and diverting a lot of food from being wasted. So it's a great documentary. It's very entertaining. I think it's probably about an hour and a half long. It's called Just Eat It if you want to look at it on YouTube. Again, the filmmakers did a wonderful job. Okay, well, that is all I had for today. And I think I now open it up to questions. If anybody has a question. Sorry, Philip, go ahead.
No, I just, we do have a couple of questions that have come in through the Q&A. And once again, if you have questions, please feel free to type those in there. And or if you see one that you have interest in, please just click the thumbs up and it'll move towards the top of our list here. So, but we'll go ahead and get started. The first one, Tara asked, the food banks use volunteers to sort food and throw away items beyond expiration date. How can we encourage them to change this process?
That's a great question. That's a great question. And I don't know whether it's the Fredericksburg Food Bank or which food bank that you're referring to. We've spoken to a few food banks who are very similar in that. And so one of the things we try to educate them and try to help them with is those dates. Those dates for different foods, again, they're not real. A lot of them are not real. When they get pasta donated, when they get beans and canned items, and there's a date, they should not be discarded because they're a month past or a few weeks past. They should really not. Now, of course, there are certain items like meats and dairy, which if you're a month past and you haven't stored it properly, then I would be very cautious about those. But if there is a concern, and if there is a lot of uncertainty as to, how can we still use this even if it was past an expiration date? Is this still viable? If you were to upcycle it, if you were to use it as a component in something else, and so that would then make it safer by cooking it or using it as an ingredient for something, that would help alleviate any bacteria that would be there. So one, I would be very cautious about following those dates. A lot of times we believe they're expiration dates and they're not. They're best by dates, which is very different. But even if there is a concern that maybe this item is not good, upcycling it and using it as a component in something else can help to reduce the risk that the food is actually contaminated, because also that can be very helpful as well. So there's two things that we recommended when we were speaking with some of the other food banks, and hopefully that will help. But I do want to say thank you for what you do. The volunteers at the food banks, they're just fantastic people, and that's one of those things where you're like, if you've been studying it and you've been working on it and you've been reading all this stuff, you get tired, you want to get re-energized, talk to some of those people who are on the ground, see what they do. And it's hard to be tired, and it's hard to be demoralized at all the stuff's being wasted when you talk to some of the people who are trying to work to prevent this happening. So thank you for what you do. It's so appreciated.
Next, there are actually two questions, both that are talking about the expiration dates, which I think you've just answered, saying, are the expiration dates guesses? And then how accurate are the expiration dates on food? So I think you've pretty much hit that. Food banks
sorry,
also
Philip,
tell us they need nutritional
Philip, if I
detail
could
on
just follow up
package.
on that, because
Sure.
it was a really good question. So are the expiration dates guesses? Again, there's a distinction between the best buy and the expiration dates, and a lot of people confuse them both. For the expiration dates, so for some items, there has been research that looks at the bacteria that remains after a certain time period under certain conditions. But that's a very controlled environment. For example, it was stored and then it was left out, or it was frozen and then it was defrosted and then it was cooked. And so you'd have to replicate all those conditions for those expiration dates to be valid. And oftentimes they take a very conservative approach, that the person is perhaps defrosted it for 10 hours or 8 hours, when in fact you may not have done that. The person refrigerated instead of froze it. So all the things that we do, like freezing it or cooking it right afterwards, all that prolongs an expiration date. But under the conditions that were tested, but when those expirations were created, they tend to have conservatively estimated when the food will have expired under conditions which may not represent what we would actually do when we store the items. So I'm not saying that they're just someone sitting at a desk guessing, but there is some art to those dates and dating them, and they're oftentimes a conservative estimate, because it's really in their best interest to try to get people to throw out the items, and then so that people will buy them again. One of the retailers that we interviewed said this as like an off the cuff remark: I know they're awful, I know they're bad, but I love those expiration dates, because that means that people come in and buy the same things over and over again. It was like, yeah, you're right. They do. All right. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, Philip. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's great. Thank you for answering those. So the next one, food banks also tell us they need nutritional detail on each package. So if someone donates loose packages of mac and cheese, they have to be thrown away because the nutritional details are only on wrappers. They say it is because they take federal funds and have rules. Is this true? Could this be true?
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't know whether I can't say whether it's true from a federal funding standpoint. I do know that from what we've studied and what we've seen from retailers is that a lot of stuff is thrown out because of packaging issues. So possibly there is some liability in terms of in terms of ingredients and sharing the ingredients. There were, when we were monitoring what was being thrown out, we saw perfectly edible food thrown out because the nutritional ingredients or the labeling wasn't in the accepted format. There was, in the documentary that I had mentioned, bars and bars of perfectly edible chocolate was thrown out because it wasn't, the labeling wasn't English and French. It had nothing to do with the food. Perfectly fine. So if you're getting packaging of mac and cheese that is still sealed, that hasn't been used, it hasn't been tampered with, but it's missing the labeling, you're probably receiving food that's perfectly fine. Unfortunately, but you're probably having to throw it out because of an administrative issue and not necessarily a quality issue, which is extremely frustrating. It's extremely frustrating. It's, again, one of those things where prior to 2018, people were worried they were going to get sued because they were feeding people and they were getting sick. That's no longer the case. Unfortunately, I don't know whether the labeling is still, whether you would be prevented or from receiving federal funds if you don't have the labeling. Unfortunately, I don't know that. I can attest to what you're telling me, and we've seen that happen a lot. There's a lot of stuff's getting thrown out for nothing to do with quality, but simply because of the labeling of the packaging. I'm sorry, I couldn't provide a better answer there. It was a great question, though.
And next question, Julie says, I used to subscribe to Ugly Foods but quit because of the amount of packaging and cost of transport. Is there a balance?
Oh my goodness. Oh yeah, that's a great question. I love that we've got such an engaged audience and people are asking some fantastic questions. Is there a balance? Yeah, I mean, the carbon footprint that's causing a lot of these ugly foods and imperfect foods, it is increasing our carbon footprint. Is there a balance? If you are purchasing in volume, I mean, that's what I think. I think if you're purchasing it in volume, you can offset this. The methane that is created from foods is far more, or sorry, from foods that is discarded is far more potent than the carbon dioxide of vehicles used to transport them. If there's a ton of food, not even a ton, say half a ton of food that is being transported and it's being the carbon dioxide that releases would be less if you're being transported over, say, a distance of say 200 miles, would be less than what it would be if that half a ton or less of food was put into a landfill. So know that it's still supporting the environment. It's still better. It's not the best because it's still creating a carbon footprint. I mean, their packaging, obviously, that's an issue that should be reduced. But the carbon dioxide, or sorry, the methane that the foods disposed of in landfills creates is far more potent than what is emitted by the transportation, by logistics, by that. It is extremely, extremely potent. And people don't realize it because I think a lot of people just think it'll just decompose. Not when it's 100 tons, it will not decompose and it gets trapped, and it is worse than the vehicles that were used to transport the foods. So I understand your concern, but know that if you're doing it in volume, if you're consistent with it, you're still doing a positive thing. You should still be doing a positive thing.
Okay. The next question, please talk more about the term insecurity and why this word is used for food that is being wasted.
So food insecurity, I forget what the official definition is, but it's used to describe those who don't have a certain amount of food. So those who are missing meals, those who don't have an adequate amount of food according to food guidelines given by I forget which department it is, and I knew I knew that would come up. I forget which department is that issues those guidelines regarding healthy foods. But those who are deficient in that are considered food insecure. And they test that through surveys of people who are within schools. And they also test that with those who are responsible for donating or allocating foods to see how many people they're serving, and they try to form a picture as to the amount of food insecurity there is. So how it relates to food waste is that if people don't have enough food, so they're food insecure, they're not sure where their meals are coming from, they're not having enough meals, they're not having enough food to eat, then it's related to food insecurity, and that we're throwing stuff out. We're throwing stuff out at a time when people are food insecure. And so that's the relationship I'm drawing with that, is that they're connected. If we don't throw things out, if we divert them, then we can alleviate that problem of food insecurity, of people not having enough. And again, I don't know the exact definition, but the general idea is that it's people who don't have enough food to eat. And it's really surprising. Actually, the numbers are really surprising. So the students and I did a deeper dive into this, and in Virginia, and we looked at some of the wealthier zip codes, some zip codes where real estate prices were, $2 million an average price for a home. So we're thinking food insecurity. Okay, that's a problem in certain areas. That's a problem in certain areas, but it's not. It's actually a lot more prevalent than we think. So what we did was we looked at real estate prices in certain zip codes, and then we looked at the schools within those zip codes. So where students would be zoned to those schools. And those schools then published a list of the, I believe, percentage of students that are on reduced or free meals. And so we looked at that compared to the average real estate price. And it was shocking. It was absolutely shocking. In zip codes where the average home price is close to $2 million, at the local elementary school, there was about 7 or 8% of students that were food insecure. It was so this, it's not a localized problem. This is a very, very prominent problem all over. So I'm sorry, I got a little off track here. I tend to do that, to carry on.
That's
Sorry.
fine. Next question is, can you discuss the correlation between sell by and best by dates?
Yes, absolutely. And I think whoever the person that's asking that question, I'm sure, is a very smart and very attractive individual as well. So I'm sorry, it's just I think I know this person. So that's great. Sell by dates and best by dates, very little difference. Sell by dates that was more in the spirit of what they were, and they're intended for the retailer. So the retailer can move their stock around. So for example, if the retailer looks at the item and sees a sell by date, they want to put that stock up front because the packaging is going to change next time they get a shipment, or there's a new promotion. Let's take a cereal box, for example. Let's take cereal. If there's a sell by date on that cereal, and the cereal has a giveaway of a free book with every purchase, well, that promotion is going to end, and so that box of cereal needs to be put to the front so that they can get rid of those things before that promotion ends. And so that's a message to the retailer. The best buy dates are messages to consumers, and that's where the scam happens. That's where you are thought to believe, if I don't consume it by this best buy date, it's not going to be good. Sell by dates are nothing. They're a message to the retailer to move packaging around, so it sells faster because they're changing something and they need to get rid of the old packaging. Best buy dates are a message to the consumer that it's not fresh, buy more stuff. So I hope that helps, Mr. Thaden.
Sure. All right. Next question is, has the federal government made any concerted effort to let food retailers know about the 2018 Emerson Act?
That is a great question. And to be honest, since 2018, very little, very, very little have they actually done to try to communicate that. The myths are still out there. They've published it on the website. There's been some promotional material that was created, that was used, that was targeted towards retailers and retail conventions and the national conference and the National Grocers Conference. But beyond that, the myths are still out there based on what the students found contacting retailers in the area. So they've done very little. But with that said, there's recently been some funding that has been put towards this issue, been put towards changing knowledge around food waste, and it's pretty significant for this type of problem. There was funding that was allocated. I believe it was in the total amount of about $2 million that's been allocated by the same agency, and I keep thinking FDA, but it's not the FDA. That was the same agency that publishes like the food guide, has allocated this money to promotion and prevention of food waste. So the money's been there, they're working on it now. Since 2018, there wasn't much done beyond just a small circle. Hopefully now that there's been more allocation towards it, and they're currently in the stage of, they just opened up the RFPs. I think the RFPs either close this week or in a couple of weeks. But they just opened that up to different companies to help them to communicate that. So it hasn't, but I'm hopeful that it will start happening now that this has become a bigger priority, and so there's been some money allocated towards it. It's a great question.
Great. Next one is, I've thrown away cans with Best Buy dates when they're several years past. Clearly, I overbought. Is there a limit?
Oh, man. Well, technically, no. I mean, a lot of the food that we that is canned it's as long as the canning has occurred properly, is fine. A lot of it now. I'm not. We did not test beyond 7 years. We didn't have food from 7 years ago to test that and to test what the bacteria was after we opened it up. So I guess I would be cautious around that. If you were to say 7 months, I would be like, absolutely. If anything, I'm happy to take it off your hands. But 7 years, maybe there may be a limit depending upon what the item is. I'd be very curious. I wish I could get the can from you, to be honest, and I could and Professor Dolby and I could then do a study that looked at the bacteria content on that, just so that we'd be able to say, hey, 7 years and it was still fine. So I don't know. I guess if it was in person, I wouldn't want you to throw the can at me, but I wish I could get that can from you so we can test that. So.
Okay, and then we've got just a few more questions. This one is, I love that this topic is part of the marketing program at UMW. Is it going to be a continued topic, and how closely do you work with environmental science program in reference to this class?
That is a great question as well. So I taught it for the first time in the fall, and a lot of it was because the food co-op was on board and they were very gung-ho about this. We had a lot of doors slammed in our face when we first thought of this. When I first thought maybe this is a problem that could be studied. Retailers, unsurprisingly, were not very forthcoming. They were not very positive. They didn't want their dirty laundry aired. They didn't want people to know how much they actually throw out. The co-op was fantastic. They said, yes, this is a big issue. And part of what we do, we want to help the community. So they let us in, and that's where the course took off. Without them, we wouldn't have started this at all. Now they've signed on for another year, so we're definitely going to be back next fall. If anything, we're actually going to expand. The food services at UMW approached me a couple of weeks ago and said, let's see if we can look at this at the college level. Let's see if we can look at it in terms of what we waste, in terms of what students are consuming, and prevent food waste on campus. So it's absolutely going to continue on at least for another year. I'm hoping it'll continue for several years so that we can perhaps buy a can in the first year and test out whether it'll still work 7 years from now. But absolutely, we're hoping it will continue. I know it will next year, and I'm hoping beyond that. And in terms of whether our alignment with environmental sciences, I do hope that we bring more on board. I've spoken to the biology department about running more studies from like a bacteria perspective, and so hopefully we'll start doing that. And I've applied for the course to be taught as an honors course. So if that goes through, and hopefully it will, fingers crossed. I mean, the honors program at UMW is like the top of the top of the top. Then I think we'll get a lot of support across departments, and I'd love to work more closely with them to develop the course. So yeah, I hope so. I really, really hope so. It'll be on for a long, long time.
Perfect. So, and then of course, Colleen, for those of you that have the Q&A, she did put in the EPA and the link to the research grants.
There it
so
is.
That is there.
And
then Jenny says, thank you. It's been a great presentation. So I think that's a great segue now that we've reached a little bit past 8:30 to come to a close tonight. So first of all, I would like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. And then of course, thank Dr. Majid and Mandy Bird for doing a wonderful job of making the presentation tonight, and Mandy for the wonderful introduction. And then I also want to make sure that we recognize Mark Simpkins and Events AV, who is kind of behind the scenes with Zoom and doing all the things. And he'll be the one that makes sure that it does go up on YouTube. So for those of you, if you'd like to rewatch this or see more information about it, you can check our YouTube channel starting tomorrow. and you'll be able to watch this as well as the full catalog of other Mary Talks that are on our YouTube channel. As our 6th season of Mary Talks continues, our next presentation will actually be on April the 20th, and we'll have a very special guest. We'll have the University President, Dr. Troy Pano, will be making our presentation on the 20th. So keep an eye out for more information and how to register for that in the next month or so. We look forward to seeing you then, if not earlier. And thank you and have a good evening. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'm glad I didn't have to follow Troy Pano. That was